Go ahead and stand whenever you get there. 1 Kings 15. Last week we talked about King Asa, and in a minute I'll give an introduction and we'll kind of get you up to speed on that. King Asa. Now we're going to turn our attention to the back to the northern kingdom is what's going to happen here in a minute. Okay, so 1 Kings chapter 15. Let me see here. Put my paper. Okay, verse 6, starting in verse 16. Chapter 15, verse 16. And there was war between Asa and Baasha, king of Israel, all their days. And Baasha, king of Israel, went up against Judah and built Ramah, that he might not suffer any to go out or come in to Asa, king of Judah. Then Asa took all the silver and the gold that were left in the treasures of the house of the Lord and the treasures of the king's house, and delivered them into the hand of his servants. And King Asa sent them to Ben-Hadad, the son of Tabrimon, the son of Hezion, king of Syria, that dwelt at Damascus, saying, There is a league between me and thee, and between my father and thy father. Behold, I have sent unto thee a present of silver and gold. Come and break thy league with Baasha, king of Israel, that he may depart from me. And Ben-Hadad hearkened unto King Asa, and sent the captains of the host which he had against the cities of Israel, and smote Ijon and Dan and Abel, Bethmaachah, and Sineroth, with all the land of Naphtali. And it came to pass when Baasha heard thereof, that he left off building Ramah, and dwelt in Tirsha. Then King Asa made a proclamation throughout all Judea, none was exempted. And they took away the stones of Ramah, and the timber thereof, wherewith Baasha had builded, and King Asa built with them Geba of Benjamin, and Mizpah. The rest of all the acts of Asa, and all his might, and all that he did, and the cities which he built, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Judah? Nevertheless, in the time of his old age, he was diseased in his feet. And Asa slept with his fathers, and was buried with his fathers in the city of David his father. And Jehoshaphat his son reigned in his stead. And this is where it's going to get a little bit confusing, but hopefully I'll help to clear that up whenever we do the introduction. And Nadab, the son of Jeroboam, began to reign over Israel in the second year of Asa, king of Judah, and reigned over Israel 2 years. And he did evil in the sight of the Lord, and walked in the way of his father, and in his sin, wherewith he made Israel to sin. And Baasha, the son of Ahijah, of the house of Issachar, conspired against him, and Baasha smote him at Gibbethon, which belonged to the Philistines. For Nadab and all Israel laid siege to Gibbethon. Even in the third year of Asa, king of Judah, did Baasha slay him, and reigned in his stead. And it came to pass, when he reigned, that he smote all the house of Jeroboam. He left not to Jeroboam any that breathed, until he had destroyed him, according unto the saying of the Lord, which he spake by the servant Ahijah the Shilonite, because of the sin of Jeroboam, which he sinned, and which he made Israel sin, by his provocation wherewith he provoked the Lord God of Israel to anger. Now the rest of the acts of Nadab, and all that he did, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Israel? And there's not a whole lot written there. And there was war between Asa and Baasha, king of Israel, all their days. In the third year of Asa, king of Judah, began Baasha, the son of Ahijah, to reign over all Israel in Tirzah 24 years. And he did evil in the sight of the Lord, and walked in the way of Jeroboam, and in his sin, wherewith he made Israel to sin. All right, you can be seated, and I've already prayed, and we're going to go a little bit into chapter 16 here in a minute. Well, let's get caught up to speed. And I was thinking I think about this a lot, actually. So the amount of things that we remember is just really, it's really ridiculous. So my kids, for example, I've talked about this before, like if they watch a movie, they not only have whole bunch of lines memorized out of the movie. But the music, like you could play the music. We've experimented with this here of late. You could play the music from a song, and they'll say, I think I know what that's from. And they'll know the movie that the song came from sometime. And so, like I've told you this before, but at one point, the movie quotes were so ridiculous, and I'm just as bad about it. Like, for some reason, I think it's funny when we quote movies. But anyway, at one point, it was so crazy that I was like, hey, this is terrible. If you guys can remember movie quotes, you can memorize Bible verses. And so, as little kids, we had this thing going for a while that if they happened to quote a movie, then immediately they were told, all right, quote a verse, and they had to quote a scripture verse. Of course, they always tried Jesus wept, but it's like, no, another one. And but it got me thinking one time about how, the things that we will commit to memory. Now, people have, whatever you're into. If you're into cars, people will have the name of every car memorized and every year and what the engine, model is and all these kinds of things. If you're into sports, you'll have the lineup for your favorite team, and you can go back in history. Some people have like the stats of all these players or what games they've won over the years. Like back in 1985, we won the World Series, blah blah blah, and they'll have all these things just memorized. And then you ask them, like, who are the 12 tribes of Israel? And it's just like, is Jacob one of them? And so, Jacob is Israel, by the way. So, but people, like, they really don't know that. They might have been in church their whole life, but they're just like, I don't know. Who was on the ark? Noah? Or was it Jonah? Or somebody like that? And it's really pathetic, really, if you think about it. And so, I've often thought, like, hey, what we should probably be pushing our kids, like, especially if you're homeschooling your kids or whatever, is, hey, number one, memorize the books of the Bible is a good thing. Teach them 66 books of the Bible, memorize them in order. Memorize, the names of the 12 tribes of Israel. Memorize the names of the, all these different things that we have in the Bible that a lot of people can't remember. But here's one that very few probably commit to memory, which is the kings. Some people don't even understand about the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom, and it gets confusing. Now, what I just read from 1 Kings, you can see why it's confusing. Because Asa dies, and then all of a sudden we're talking about Baasha and how he's at war with Asa all the years of his life and how he began to reign. And if you don't really stop and think it through, it can get quite confusing. So I'm going to go ahead and write this out and try to every week from here on, as we begin to go over all these kings, try to get this in our minds a little bit. Okay, so when we read, of course, in Samuel is where we see Saul getting, he's the first king of Israel. Okay, so we spent some time talking about Saul. And then, of course, Saul sins, and God says, I'm going to raise up David. And David then is the next king that's mentioned. And we spent a long time talking about David. And I've talked about the life of David lots of different times. After David, of course, he was a bloody man, the Bible says. And so he was punished. I guess you could say punished. But one of the things that happened, the result of his sin, is that he couldn't build the tabernacle and all that stuff. But he would set it up for his son. And so his son, Solomon, ends up being the next king, and it's in a time of peace, and very wealthy. He gets all the riches, and then people come. He's got tons of fame, notoriety, and so he does well. But you remember, his weak spot was women, and so he ended up. It says he loved many strange women, and they took his heart away, and God was upset with him. And he even went so far as to set up the altars and everything so that they could all sacrifice to their gods and all that stuff. Obviously, this made God upset. And so God said, I am going to actually take away from you, and the kingdom's going to actually be split. Okay, so this is where we began talking about the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. So the northern kingdom would be the 10 tribes, or 10 of the tribes, and still was called Israel. Okay, they had Samaria, ended up having Samaria as their capital, but they were still Israel by name. And the southern, the southern kingdom, which obviously was still Israel in a manner of speaking, but then they kind of took on the name Judah, which later on the name Jews is actually a reference to the southern kingdom, because the northern kingdom just kind of gets dispersed. Okay, so under this reign, Solomon's son, Rehoboam, is the next king. He does wickedly. I mean, you're going to see like over and over, all these kings are just wicked. Okay, he does wicked, and God says, I'm going to raise up Jeroboam, and Jeroboam, Ahijah the prophet tells him this, Jeroboam is going to take the 10 tribes and the 10 northern tribes, and there's going to be split, and ultimately they kind of become at war. And we read about in our text, like, you know, in the days of Asa, it was just kind of like, hey, these two kingdoms, these two families were constantly at war. So you got Rehoboam and you got Jeroboam. I'm hoping that I'm spelling everything right. So this is the southern kingdom, right? Because he's a son of Solomon, and what the Bible says is for David's sake, because he was man after God's own heart, and of course the prophecy extended up until the time of Christ. Christ would come out of this lineage, but he said that for his sake, he would keep a remnant. And in the southern tribe, there ends up being a remnant of those who would keep the city of David going. And so they rule in Jerusalem there, okay? So let's go ahead and put the southern kingdom, or Judah, okay? And Jeroboam is, let's just do north. Okay, now, for a little while, it looks like he's the bad guy, and he's the good guy. He gets the 10 tribes. You know, God's promising him that, but you don't have to read far after the narrative switches over from him to find out that Jeroboam's a bad guy too. And in fact, what you're going to find out is in the northern kingdom, every single king is going to be bad. None of them are going to have a heart after David. They're all bad. In fact, it'll say, you know, they did all the sins of their father Jeroboam. And the southern tribe, it's always going to compare it to David. It's going to be like, you know, they had a perfect heart like David. And so this is actually the line of David that we're talking about. Some kings in the southern kingdom are going to be good, but most of them are going to be bad. Okay, so after Rehoboam, we have Ahijah. Am I right? I get Ahijah and Abijah mixed up. Ahijah. Is that right? Somebody help me out. Movie quote. Oh, wait, that's backwards. Am I right? No, Abijah. I got confused all of a sudden. Is it Abijah? Somebody want to speak out? Help me out. Okay. I think that was the prophet, actually. I got mixed up. Abijah. Yeah, Abijah. You can see why I got mixed up. Okay. Abijah. All right. And one of the reasons you forget about him, because he's a nobody. All right. Here's what it says. He reigned for a short time, and it says he did evil, but for David's sake, he allowed a lamp to stay in Israel, and so basically he would raise up his son, which would be a good king. Now this is the king that we've been talking about, or last week we were talking about, and we read about him in our text today. This is Asa. Asa had a pure heart. So last week we talked about the fact that he got the Sodomites out of the land. He broke down the idols. He even kicked his mother off of the throne as the queen. because of the fact that she had an idol, and basically he had a really good heart. Now, he still did a couple things wrong, but that the text brings up, but it's like ultimately God saw he had a good heart, and he had a pure heart like his father David. Okay, so now in the narrative, he dies. The rest of the acts, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the Kings? And then all of a sudden, it starts talking about Baasha, and how Baasha and Asa are at war all the days of their lives. Baasha. Okay? So it gets kind of confusing, but in our text, what we're doing is now we're moving over to, it's finishing up Asa's life and saying that they're at war, and now we're going to get caught up on the northern tribe and find out about this guy. But in order to find out about this guy, we have to look at Nadab. Okay? And so it's just catching us up on this timeline. Asa is actually a king for like 41 years, the Bible says. So therefore, a lot of time passed, and so we're getting a really small amount of narrative in the text. Okay, but so this is where we are. So today we're going to talk about Baasha and his conspiracy to overthrow Nadab. So it's not like Nadab died and his son ruled in his stead. No, there was an overthrow, and he overtook Nadab. Okay, so let's look at our text. And chapter 16, or actually let's back up to 25. Yeah, okay, right after it says Asa slept with his fathers and was buried with his father in the city of David. 25 says, and Nadab, right here, Nadab, the son of Jeroboam, began to reign over Israel in the second year of Asa. So you see the overlap there. We're actually in the days of Asa, but Nadab begins reigning in the other kingdom. Okay, so, and then it says, he reigned over Israel 2 years, and he did evil in the sight of the Lord. We don't really know that much about him and what he did, but the Bible says he was a wicked king. Okay, he did evil in the sight of the Lord and walked in the way of his father and in his sin wherewith he made Israel to sin. And Baasha, the son of Ahijah of the house of Issachar, conspired against him, and Baasha smote him in Gibbethon. Okay, so we see this conspiracy, this overthrow, where he works it out to where he can overthrow Nadab and get the kingdom. But he's going to go farther than that, because there's still some family left of the house of Jeroboam, and he's going to slay all of them. Part of this overthrow, this would often happen in the time of kings, is that they would just get rid of all the other seeds so that nobody would try to overthrow them and retaliate against them, so they would just kill them all. Okay, and this is kind of what happens. And the thing is, this was already prophesied about Jeroboam, that all his family is going to be killed, put to death, and all that. So I'm leaving some details out of the story, but that's okay. So now we got Baasha. He's at war with Asa. All the rest of the family of Jeroboam is killed, and Nadab is overthrown, and now Baasha is king. Okay, so he's the one that I want to talk about. So number one, we already kind of talked about this fact that he conspires against a wicked king. Now I'm going to explain here in a minute. In fact, go to chapter 16. It says, then the word of the Lord came to Jehu, the son of Hananiah. Now this isn't King Jehu that we're going to read about later on. This is a prophet. See why it gets so confusing to read the book of Kings. Okay, it came to Jehu, the son of Hananiah, against Baasha, saying, he's speaking on behalf of God, for as much as I exalted thee out of the dust and made thee prince over my people Israel, and thou hast walked in the way of Jeroboam, and hast made my people Israel to sin, to provoke me to anger with their sins, Behold, I will take away the posterity of Baasha and the posterity of his house, and will make thy house like the house of Jeroboam, the son of Nebat. Him that dieth of Baasha in the city shall the dogs eat, and him that dieth in his in the field shall the fowls of the air eat. Now that's very similar to the punishment that he said about whenever he was getting on to Jeroboam. Okay, he said, hey, you're going to be destroyed, dogs will eat you and everything. And this is what happened. That prophecy was fulfilled. So we see, first of all, that Baasha is going to conspire against this wicked king, and he's going to overthrow him, and he's going to be in the office. Now, this isn't the first time that God, because if you keep reading, he said, go back to chapter 2, verse 2, for as much as I exalted thee out of the dust. Isn't that interesting? God is saying, I exalted you, I put you on that, I gave you that position, I allowed you to be there. Now, this isn't the first time in all the stories of the kings that we will see God using somebody who is actually a wicked person to do the work of God. Okay, first one that comes to mind is Nebuchadnezzar later on. He's going to work for God on behalf of God, and he is going to take Israel into captivity, or Judah into captivity, but actually he's a wicked man too. So later on he's going to be punished. But at that time, God even calls him my servant, Nebuchadnezzar, because he's doing the work of the Lord. So if that's the case with Baasha, this is certainly not the first time that this would happen. But here's the thing. As God's talking to Baasha or speaking to the prophet who's going to talk to Baasha, he says, I exalted you, put you in that place, and you caused my people Israel to sin. Which means that Baasha had an opportunity to do right. Now, wouldn't that have been interesting if you had Asa, who had a good heart and loved the Lord, and then you had on the northern kingdom, you had Baasha, who had a change of heart, had a good heart, wanted to live for the Lord. What would happen? Maybe all the tribes would have come back together again, and God would have ruled, But if you remember, that's what Jeroboam didn't want to happen. He was afraid everybody will see the city of David and they'll all want to go back there. And so that's what started him making idols and stuff anyway. Okay, so the reality though is that Baasha did have the opportunity to do right. And God had put him in that position. He had the rule. He even got rid of wicked people. Now look, when Asa became king, he even got rid of his own mother for idolatry. And he put all the wicked people out of the land, Sodomites and all that kind of stuff, put them all out of the land. So what's wrong with Baasha saying, hey, Nadab, you're wicked, and you're full of idolatry, and you're causing Israel to sin. I'm overthrowing you, and I'm kicking you out of here, and I'm going to serve the Lord. But that's not what he did. He kicked him out of there, and he got his place, and he ended up doing some of the same things that Jeroboam did. And so here's the interesting thing. It appears that, number two, is that God did bless him by putting him in that position. And so look at verse 16. Chapter 15, verse 16. And there was war between Asa and Baasha, king of Israel, all their days. Now, Asa, I said, reigned for 41 years. I got kind of confused. I don't remember how many years it was before Baasha took kingdom. I think it was only like 2 years. So whatever the case, we're talking about years and years and years of them fighting against each other. Okay? Now, this is an interesting thing. Is it possible for Baasha, let's just say he got right with the Lord, and now he's ruling over the northern kingdom, and they're at war with the southern kingdom. He's at war with Asa, who's a good king and loves the Lord and has a pure heart. So now you got two kings that love the Lord, have a pure heart. Is it possible for God to bless both of them? Now that's an interesting thought. Okay, the first thing that went through my mind is, and I realized they weren't actually at war, but the first thing that went through my mind is Paul and Barnabas in the New Testament. Paul and Barnabas end up having a contention that's so sharp that one goes this way and the other goes that way. And then the Bible follows the life of Paul from there on out, but doesn't necessarily mean that he didn't bless Barnabas. In fact, the argument's often made that the whole dispute, which was over John Mark later on, Paul says, hey, bring him to me because he's profitable for ministry. The argument is often made that, hey, it sounds to me like Barnabas must have done a good job then taking John Mark under wing. We really don't know how that story went. But hypothetically speaking, could God have been blessing Paul, which we know he was, and could he at the same time been blessing, my mind keeps going blank, blessing Barnabas, even though these two were at odds with one another? Okay? So the reason that worked is because even though they were at odds and disagreed with one another, they were still serving the Lord. And it was like, I want to serve the Lord, but I don't want to do it quite like you're doing. And this person said, I want to serve the Lord, but I don't want to do it quite like you're doing. And so they went their separate ways and continued to serve the Lord. Okay? And so God, I believe, I have no reason not to believe it, blessed both ministries. Okay? But the reason that doesn't work in this case is because you have Asa serving the Lord, and then you got Baasha, who just wants to be victorious, apparently. Okay? So I don't think there's any way in that case that God's going to bless him. Okay, so here's what happens, and I hate to use churches like kingdoms because they're not kingdoms, but here's what happens a lot of time in the ministry. Different churches or maybe different movements within the church, you know, you got this camp and that camp, you know, this Bible college and that Bible college. The reality is, even if one's a little more liberal than the other one, or one's a little too uptight and too conservative for the other people, or maybe one person has just a little bit different methodology or something like that, as long as they're both serving the Lord, I 100% believe God can bless both groups of people, both movements, even though they don't completely agree with one another, maybe take jabs at each other once in a while, maybe don't get along, and try to some degree take people from one camp and bring them to their camp even. Sometimes you see that happening. But God could very well be blessing both people. Okay? But what happens a lot of times in these movements or these churches or these schools or whatever is you got one person who's only concerned about fighting for themselves and having more people and being more, having more notoriety. And so all of their efforts are not based on how do I serve the Lord better. It's based on how do I do better than those people? How do I put those people down? And I'm going to tell you for a fact, God's not going to bless that movement or that people or that church if their focus is off serving God and on other things. Okay, so, however, it does seem like God gave Baasha an opportunity. And even though they were enemies with Asa, who was a good guy, God raised him to that position. He says, I brought you out of the dust, and I exalted you. And so it certainly was a possibility. But alas, he became a wicked king, just like Nadab, and just like Jeroboam, his great-grandfather. And so his end, you'll see, was just like Jeroboam. You're going to be killed. All your posterity is going to be killed. Those who die, the dogs are going to eat them, and if they don't eat them, then the fowls are going to come and eat them. I mean, that's almost exactly what he said to Jeroboam. So here's the conclusion of the whole message here. What was the advantage of Baasha conspiring against Nadab? What did he accomplish? He accomplished absolutely nothing. Jeroboam's reign was a punishment on Solomon. He said, I'm going to take the kingdom away from your son. I'm going to give Jeroboam 10 tribes. Well, good. I remember following this story thinking Jeroboam at this point is kind of a hero. And he takes a wrong turn and he does bad, but at this point it's like, hey, God's blessing him. And even though God can still bless Solomon, he still wants to bless Solomon, he has an opportunity to bless him as well. But then he does wickedly. And so God says, you know what? I am going to, he actually is his son and ends up reigning. So it's kind of like in his generation. But you could say that his reign or his overthrow of Nadab is the punishment of Jeroboam. Okay? And so Baasha, now has the opportunity to do right and to, break this cycle. But he doesn't, which means that his overthrow of Nadab accomplished absolutely nothing for him. Now, it always is going to serve God's purposes because God's in charge and he can make good come out of bad situations for his people, and often that. But here's the conclusion that I want to make and apply to all of us. So often, we spend all of our time and all of our energy and all of our effort to put ourselves in a certain position or to get some kind of notoriety or to get some kind of popularity or whatever the case, and we spend all of our time and effort so that we can become exactly like the people who God's been mad at the whole time and destroying the whole time, which is a total waste of our time and effort. As God's people, what we need to do, and I know it sounds so, everybody should already know this, but we need to keep our focus on the Lord. And when he takes those people who would be our quote-unquote enemies and he knocks them down, it shouldn't be our desire to just jump up and down and say, yeah, we're better than them, and then just end up going down the same cycle that they did. God's going to raise somebody else up, and that's going to happen to us, and then they're going to laugh at us, and then they're going to... Look, I want to break that cycle. I don't mean, I don't have any reason to really apply this to our church, but in that kind of a situation, the goal should be, I want to break this cycle. I want to break this cycle. I want to honor the Lord. I'm not going to rejoice when my enemy suffers. I'm not going to try to bring down my somebody else who's trying to serve the Lord and trying to do right as well. I'm going to keep my focus on serving the Lord. And it does certainly apply to churches and schools and movements and all that. But the reality is, what all has to do with is you as an individual and me or our church or your family or whatever the case, your communication needs to be straight with the Lord, and don't worry about all these other things that get in the way. Don't waste your time and your effort trying to set yourself up and put yourself in a position that God's in the end just going to knock it down anyway. And so that would be so counterproductive. All right, so we're talking about the conspiracy of Baasha. Nadab, Baasha, none of those have a very long section. Now, they were, Baasha was there for many years, but we don't have a whole lot said about them because his whole life was kind of pointless if you think about it in that way. So next week, Lord willing, we'll move on and go to the next king and see what God's got for us there. Father, we thank you for your word and for the truths that we can glean from it. I pray you help us stay focused on your will and your people, and help us do everything we can as a church to do your will and to set people up and set ourselves up to be able to serve you and bring glory to your name. Help us not to spend our time at battle with other people and fighting them for no cause, but help us stand for truth and right, and to not let it bother us, Lord, if we don't have the position or the power. We want you to have all the power and all the glory, Lord. I pray you bless this night. Let it be with us. Give us safety as we go our separate ways, and bless the camp time and all that, Lord. I pray you be glorified in Jesus' name.